Have you ever wondered, why does Homer keep mentioning Agamemnon? Who exactly is Orestes? And why are there so many kings in the Odyssey? To understand the Odyssey, you first need to understand one family. Part 1, Greece wasn't one country. One thing that can be confusing in the Odyssey is that almost every important man seems to be a king. Odysseus is a king. Menelaus is a king. Agamemnon is also a king. So how can they all be kings at the same time? The answer is that ancient Greece was not one united country. Instead, it was divided into many separate kingdoms. Sparta was one kingdom, Mycenae was another. Ithaca and Pylos were also ruled separately. Each kingdom had its own ruler, army, and people. Menelaus ruled Sparta, Odysseus ruled Ithaca, Nestor ruled Pylos, and Agamemnon ruled Mycenae. These kings were independent rulers, but they could still form an alliance when they faced a common enemy. That is what happened during the Trojan War. The Greek kings brought their own soldiers and ships to fight against Troy. Agamemnon became the supreme commander of this united Greek army. So Odysseus was not Agamemnon's servant, and Agamemnon was not the king of Ithaca. Odysseus was still a king in his own country, but during the war, he served under Agamemnon's military command. You can think of them as independent leaders fighting together under one commander. Once you understand this, the relationships in the Odyssey become much easier to follow. Part 2. Why Agamemnon commands everyone. But if Odysseus was a king, why did he obey Agamemnon? The answer is simple. Agamemnon ruled Mycenae, the most powerful kingdom in Greece. He commanded the largest army, the largest fleet, and the greatest political influence. Because of that, the other Greek kings accepted him as the leader of their alliance. When the Trojan War began, each kingdom brought its own soldiers and ships. Odysseus led the men of Ithaca. Menelaus led Sparta. Nestor led Pylos, but together they fought under one supreme commander. That commander was Agamemnon. So although Odysseus remained the king of Ithaca, on the battlefield, he followed Agamemnon's command. Understanding this makes the relationships in the Odyssey much easier to follow. Part 3. The Royal Family. But if Agamemnon and Menelaus were brothers, why did they rule different kingdoms? The answer lies in two royal families. Their father was Atreus, king of Mycenae. When Atreus died, the throne passed to his eldest son Agamemnon. Meanwhile, Menelaus took a very different path. He married Helen, the daughter of King Tyndareus of Sparta. Helen's older sister was Clytemnestra. Agamemnon married Clytemnestra while Menelaus married Helen. In other words, two brothers married two sisters. Through his marriage to Helen, Menelaus became king of Sparta. So although Agamemnon and Menelaus were brothers, they ended up ruling two different kingdoms, and that detail changes everything. Because when Prince Paris of Troy came to Sparta and took Helen away, he wasn't just taking another man's wife. He was taking the queen of Sparta. Menelaus immediately turned to his older brother Agamemnon for help. As the most powerful king in Greece, Agamemnon called upon the other Greek rulers to honor their oath and join the war. Odysseus came from Ithaca. Nestor came from Pylos, Ajax came from Salamis, Diomedes came from Argos. Together, these kings formed the greatest Greek alliance ever assembled, and that was the beginning of the Trojan War. Part 4. The woman who started the Trojan War. People often say the Trojan War began because of Helen, but that's only part of the story. Helen was famous throughout Greece as the most beautiful woman in the world. According to Greek mythology, Aphrodite promised Prince Paris that he could have Helen's love if he chose her as the fairest goddess. Paris accepted the offer. He traveled to Sparta as a guest, where Helen was the wife of King Menelaus. Then he returned to Troy with Helen. Whether she was kidnapped or willingly left with Paris depends on which ancient source you read. But either way, the queen of Sparta was gone. Menelaus demanded that Helen be returned. When Troy refused, he turned to his brother Agamemnon. As the most powerful king in Greece, Agamemnon called upon the other Greek rulers to honor their oath and join the war. Officially, the Greeks fought to bring Helen home, but many modern historians believe there was more at stake. Troy controlled one of the most important trade routes between the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea. A united Greek campaign against Troy would have offered not only honor, but also strategic and economic advantages. Homer never says this directly. In his epic, the war is fought for honor, loyalty, and the oath of the Greek kings. But from a historical perspective, Helen may have been more than the cause of the war. She may have been the perfect reason to unite Greece against one powerful rival. Perhaps that's why the Trojan War has fascinated people for nearly 3,000 years, because it wasn't simply a story about one woman. It was a story where love, honor, politics, power, and destiny all collided. Part 5. The King Who Never Made It Home. The Greeks won the Trojan War. After 10 long years of fighting, Agamemnon returned home as the greatest hero in Greece. He had defeated Troy. He had led the largest army the Greek world had ever seen. At last, he was finally home. But long before the war even began, Agamemnon had made a terrible choice. To gain favorable winds for the Greek fleet, he sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia. His wife, Clytemnestra, never forgave him. During the 10 years he spent at war, her grief turned into hatred. Eventually, she began a relationship with Aegisthus, and together they plotted Agamemnon's death. So instead of being welcomed home as a hero, Agamemnon was betrayed in his own palace. The king who conquered Troy could not survive his own home. It is one of the most tragic homecomings in all of Greek mythology, and Homer mentions this story again and again throughout the Odyssey. But why? Because Agamemnon's fate becomes the perfect contrast to Odysseus. One king returns home to betrayal. The other returns home to faithfulness. Part 6. Who is Orestes? After Agamemnon's murder, one question remained. Would anyone avenge the fallen king? The answer was his son, Orestes. Years after his father's death, Orestes returned home and killed Aegisthus, the man who had murdered Agamemnon. In some versions of the myth, he also killed his own mother, Clytemnestra, for her part in the crime. To the Greeks, Orestes became the model of a son who defended his father's honor. So why does Homer keep mentioning Orestes in the Odyssey? Because Orestes is not the story's hero. He is Telemachus's example. At the beginning of the Odyssey, Telemachus is young, uncertain, and powerless. His father's house has been taken over by the suitors, yet he doesn't know what to do. Again and again, Athena reminds him of Orestes, not to teach him revenge, but to teach him courage, to remind him that a son must one day stand up for his father, protect his family, and become the man he is meant to be. Only after hearing Orestes' story does Telemachus begin his own journey. Long before Odysseus returns home, it is Telemachus who must first grow into his father's son. Part 7. The Hidden Contrast in the Odyssey. At first glance, the Odyssey seems to tell two completely different stories. One is the story of Agamemnon, the other is the story of Odysseus. But Homer wants us to compare them. Both kings left home to fight in the same war. Both spent years away from their families. Both finally returned home. Yet only one survived. Agamemnon returned to betrayal. Odysseus returned to a faithful wife. The difference was not the battlefield. It was what waited for them at home. Homer invites us to compare two women, Clytemnestra and Penelope. One chose revenge, the other chose hope. One welcomed another man into her home. The other spent 20 years refusing every suitor. Yet the story is more tragic than it first appears. Both women were, in different ways, victims of the same war. For 10 long years, they lived without their husbands. They endured grief, loneliness, and uncertainty that no victory could erase. But in the face of suffering, they made very different choices, and that is the contrast Homer wants us to see. The Trojan War lasted 10 years, but surviving the journey home proved even harder. For Homer, the greatest challenge was never defeating Troy. It was whether there was still a home worth returning to.